What the heck? Oh, there we are. Haha. Okay. Hey, fun times. Just get some confirmation from the chat room that we're seeing everything. Yeah, we're good. Sweet. It's working. Awesome. Learning, right? I'd done a live before, but I don't know. It was a while ago. I kind of forgot that I had to start it on the YouTube side too. Oops. Thought it automatically started when the time it got there. But okay, cool. Excellent. It looks like we have quite a bit of people. If you notice, I do have, there is a chat room. I think you can see it virtually. It's kind of hard. Right here, somewhere over there. Oh, opposite side of me. That side. It's on that side of my screen, but this side for you. Okay, so over there is the chat box. You can go ahead and chat, ask some questions. I will periodically kind of try to look at that chat box while we're reviewing everything today. And I'm going to be doing everything live. So I will probably mess up and probably have some things go wrong. You'll see me troubleshoot. We'll have some fun. And hopefully some of you already have seams. I know that some of you do, just seeing the names in the chat box. So if you don't, I hope you like it, and you can pick up yourself a copy because it's a lot of fun. It's a really fun stack. And I have a special treat for you guys today because I stayed up really late last night. So far, the #1 feature request is people want animations, right? Darn Paul Russum always has to wow people with his cool animations. So he's already done it with sections box, but I'm adding it natively into seams. And it's going to be really cool. They're really silky smooth, and I will show you a preview of what I've got done so far. So I'll probably have the update out hopefully by Friday. I've only added it to 2 of the paths, so I'm sure once I get to some of the more complex paths, it's going to be maybe I hit some roadblocks. But it's really cool. We're going to be looking at that today. So yeah. Without further ado, let's jump on in and get this bad boy started. So hold on one second. Let me go ahead and set up stream here. Excellent. Hopefully everyone is seeing my desktop, right? And the chat box up here. Oh, now it's above me, right? Chat box is right up here. And let's go ahead and open up some RapidWeaver. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a really simple file. Actually, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to start a completely new project. Why not? Or actually, maybe what I should probably do. See, I'm just going totally off the cuff. Maybe I'll just give a quick overview of what Seams is for those that maybe don't know what it is, right? So let's go ahead and just open up Safari. Get a new Safari window open over here. We're just going to go to Weaver Space and let's go to the Seams product page. Voila. So here we are. Here is Seams. As you probably know, if you've already seen the demo, what Seams does is it gives us these nice transitional seams between our content, right? Because traditionally we have, just like flat straight lines, and no one likes flat straight lines, right? It just looks boring. We're in 2019 now, and we need to have something a little bit nicer. So here we have a nice subtle S-curve here that really gives us a much nicer transition. A lot of times people will even glance at this and not even really notice that it's not straight, but it looks more pleasing to them, right? Now here's an example of going completely outside the box and doing something a little extreme, probably with Seams, where it's building an entire kind of like painting a canvas with seams. So here's 2 different seam stacks. We have some at the top here that does kind of like these abstract clouds, and at the bottom with hills and suns and grass and all kinds of interesting stuff. Next, we have an interesting one where the seam is actually going through our content. So this is really cool and interesting because it really adds some dynamic to the site, because we're actually transitioning between parts of the page in the middle of content, right? Now here I'm using images. I think an effect like this really looks best if you're doing it with images. With text, it gets a little hairy because it depends on the color that you're using, right? Maybe we'll do an example of that where we do this through text and you kind of see how that could be wrong. But yeah. And then here we just see, here's just a little gallery of all the various seams that we have. Now, it's actually not all of them. This is just a small, very small subset of what's possible, right? But we have slanted lines, angles, curves, fade, triple angles, little divots, waves, drips, paint splatters, paper tears, grass, these little curly things. I called them spades. I don't know. Came up with the name of that. I don't know if that's a good one or not. Then we kind of have jagged lines, little bumps, and clouds, right? So, and there are more, and we'll kind of dive through some of those today. And please make sure that if you have any questions, I will periodically look at the chat box and hopefully maybe answer questions live so that you guys can get input in here as well. So that's the overview. Let's jump into the Seams demo project. Thanks, Matthias. I see you asked about some animations. Let me quickly do the overview, and then we'll jump into some of the animation questions. If that URL kind of gets lost in the chat box, make sure you post it again when we get to the animation section. Sweet. Okay, so here is the Seams demo project. You could download this from the doc portal. It's also available if you were to download the Seams stack now. Depending on when you purchase Seams, it's been updated, I think earlier this week. So it has these new before and after pages. I created these pages when I did the sales, kind of the main video on the product page. So, and why not? Let's go through this. So here's a perfect use case for Seams, right? It keeps opening on my other monitor. So here we have just a simple basic web page. Okay. It's a nice web page. It's not going to win us any design awards or anything like that, but it's just a nice web page. But as we see, it has all these straight lines, right? And I think we can soften the page up and make it look a little nicer if we just jazz this page up with some seams. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. And just to give you an example of what I'm going to be doing, here is a page. Here's what we're going to be building. We're going to be building this. So I'm just going to be, it's the same exact web page. I'm just going to be adding some seams to it just to make it look a little nicer, right? So here we have some curves at the top. Here we have some slanted lines to kind of give us a very kind of standout section here. Very interesting. Here we have some more waves. And then further down, we have just an angle, a simple angle here. Now, probably in real life, you're probably not going to mix straight edges and curves like this on a page. You're probably going to go for either the straight edgy look or the curvy look. But in this demo, I just kind of wanted to give you a variation to kind of show you things that we can do with the seam stack. So let's go ahead and build this page. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this before page and I'm going to duplicate it. Okay, I'm going to duplicate this page. Okay, and go ahead and make that bigger just so we could see it in all of its glory. Okay, so at the top we have an impact stack. Okay, and impact. So, and what we want to do is we want to add a seam, an S curve to the bottom of this. Okay, to kind of give a nice transition between the impact and the content below. So with impact, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make sure that the seam is on top of all, because impact you can do slides, right? And we want to make sure that the actual seam is on top of all the slides. Okay, you don't want to put it on each individual slide. So if you are an impact user, you can go ahead, if you know on the slides, you can add content to the slide, right? And here I've added content, I've added a header. But that's not where you want to add the seam if you're using impact. With impact, what you want to do is you want to go into the main impact stack and go foreground content floating. So we want to float content across all slides. So it's going to be the same content on all slides. And that gives us a little drop zone area up at the top. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and go to favorites. I'm going to add seams. Okay. And we wanted an S curve, right? So we're going to go ahead and add an S curve. Now, choosing the color of seams is important because right now, if I were to, let's just preview this really quick. We'll see that, well, the seam is up at the top. We can easily fix that, but it's also blue. We need to be able to make sure that we match this color down here, which is white, right? So we're going to make the seam color white. So we're going to go into the main seam stack, and we're going to change this color to be white. Boop, white. Now, if you remember, it was also at the very top because that's where the content for impact resides. What we want to do is there's a convenient little position settings here inside seams, and we can just set that to be bottom. And that should give us exactly what we want. That's all we need. All right, so I added seams to the page, click 2 settings, and boom, we're done. Pretty cool, right? So just kind of while we're in here, let's just give you a quick overview of what kind of seams is doing here, okay? So what's important here is seams is actually creating an SVG for us on the fly. Now, why is that important? Because SVGs are scalable vector graphics, if you haven't heard of them, and they're very small, right? So in bite size wise, they're very small. It's inline to the page. We can nicely style them with CSS, so that way I can match this seam with the content color below, and so on and so forth, right? Another important thing with SVGs is that they're crystal clear and sharp across every device, right? I've gone through multiple iterations of the seam stack because I tried various different ways to create these transitions. And SVGs just created the smoothest, clearest lines out of anything I tried, right? So I went with the SVG route. Now, another thing that we get with using SVGs, let me go ahead and preview this in the browser, okay, is that you'll notice that when this browser scales down, the actual seam scales nicely along with it, right? There are some other things out there that give you a nice transition on desktop, but once you scale down, like the curve doesn't scale nicely with the device as well, right? It gets more exaggerated on mobile devices or so on and so forth. So it took me a while to really master that. And I'll show you later on when we go into like using your own SVGs, how and why that does that. Okay, it's an interesting little trick. So next up, let's see, in the seam stack, there is Total CMS 2 integration. I know some of you probably have seen that and you've asked me about that. Total CMS, it only supports Total CMS 2, and that is in a, like, if there is anything like pre-alpha, that's what it's currently in. There are a few testers out there, but they're not using it in production. But Total CMS 2 is underway. Hopefully this year you will all have it, and it's just amazing. So anyway, next up, canvas height. So this is important. Canvas height. So seams, what it does is it's creating, imagine this being something like inside a photo editor. And what it's doing is the seam itself is always 1,000 pixels wide. That's the perspective that it creates. Okay. But I give you the flexibility to change the height of that canvas. So by default, you don't have the ability, well, I don't give you the ability to change the width. The width is set at 1,000 pixels. The height will be, you can change that to be 100. You can make it whatever you want. You could set this to 300, so on and so forth. Okay. So basically your canvas is always going to be 1,000 pixels wide. And then you can set your height here. Now that will obviously, depending on the width of the browser, scale. Does that make sense? Hopefully that kind of makes sense to people. Basically, think of it as an image, okay, just like a JPEG. that is 1,000 pixels wide by 100 pixels tall. And when you put it in the page, it responds. Obviously, when it gets on mobile devices, it's going to get shorter and thinner, right? And then as it scales up, it's going to grow. But because it's an SVG, it will scale perfectly, and you're not going to lose any crispness and sharpness. So that's what this canvas height is for. It allows you to determine the height of your canvas to draw on with seams. Okay. We saw what these positions were. These allow us to position at the top, the bottom. The default is static. If you just want it exactly where it is, that's what it is. Add bottom scene, we're going to get to that. And showing content, we're going to get to that in a little bit as well. Okay. Next up, so that does it with the parent seam stack. Now you can add multiple paths here. Now, right now we're just going to stick with one. Later on, we'll go ahead and start adding multiple paths. But right now we'll just stick with one. Now, you'll notice here that you can provide a custom color. By default, it inherits from the parent stack. Okay. Now, the custom colors are very useful when you start doing multiple seams or multiple paths inside your seam stack. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But for right now, we're not going to play with custom colors. Now, canvas height. This is important because this needs to match the setting that's in the parent stack. Now, it's a little unfortunate, right? You have to set this manually. This is something that you just have to manually set, and it needs to match both if you want it to get consistent results. So like if you notice here, if I set this to 300 like I did earlier, it didn't really change anything here. Okay, that's because the setting here in the parent stack is used inside preview and publish, but in edit mode, because of all this extra like UI that Stacks adds, because we need to be able to add and have some sort of edit UI, that value doesn't carry down to the actual canvas here in edit mode. So we need to set it here as well. So as you see here, when I set it here, this is exactly what it's going to look like now. I set it to, I forgot the maximum height is 200. My bad. I might be willing to make that larger if we need it, but I think from my tests and things that I've done, 200 was pretty sufficient. Okay. So you have to make sure that these are matched. And I guess there's a bug right there because that one allows you to go above 200. My bad. Okay. So you're going to manually have to make those match. Okay. Between these two stacks. That's really the only kind of caveat between with seams, is just making sure that those match. Now it's going to work in preview or edit mode, but if you want to make it really look inside of edit mode like it's going to look inside preview, you want to make sure that those two things match. Okay. Next up is shift. This is really useful when you're doing multiple. You can see exactly what it's doing. It's just shifting the seam up and down. This is very useful when you start using multiple paths and you want to layer them on top of each other. Okay. Next is mirror seam. And what this does, it just flips the color, right? So depending if you want your seam to be at the top or the bottom of something, this will flip it. Okay. Next is Animate Id. This is a new feature that we're going to be going over in a little bit later today. This is hot off the press. I just added this feature. I added this setting this morning, actually. So it's really hot off the press. So we're not going to look at that right now. And then for now, I should note these top settings here are the same for every single path. They all have the colors. They all have the canvas height. They all have shift. They all have mirror. They all have this Animate Id. Now the path definition group, this is where everything starts being different, because these settings allow you to modify the actual curve and path and shape that we're seeing here. Okay. And as you see, a lot of these values, they're kind of hard to explain. Because if you've ever used a tool like Affinity Designer or Illustrator, and you've worked with curves, you'll know that when you have a curve, there's multiple points that affect how that curve is done. Well, that's essentially what we're doing here, right? We're affecting those points that are affecting this curve, right? So these values, they're kind of just relative. it's going to be hard to say, I need to set it to exactly this value. You just kind of have to move these sliders around to kind of get the look that you want. Now, obviously, you can make things look really bad like that, right? But you can also make things look very interesting. So let me quickly look at the chat box to see if there's any questions going on here. Let's see, some questions about some animation stuff. We'll look at that. People liking his link. Cool. Okay, just talks about Matthias's awesome animations, which we'll look at in a little bit. Okay, so that kind of reviews the basics of seams. Okay, now these settings here are going to be different. So let's just look at a different one. Let's look at the angle. Right, you'll notice the angle is a little simpler. Right, I chose an S curve, which is, if you notice, it says Pro. It's just because it's only Pro because it has a lot of kind of path definition settings that could be confusing for some people. But here's a little simpler, right? So you have the start point, the midpoint, the horizontal midpoint, and this is the vertical midpoint, okay? And then this is the ending point, right? So, yeah, pretty simple. As you see, you could just kind of move these sliders to get the look that you want. And so, yeah, excellent. So let's go ahead and let's see if I broke this. Let's make sure it still works. Oh, it still works. As you see, it's kind of funky. It's a little bit different than I think this is a little dramatic for what this page is, but anyway, we'll just leave that as is for now. Okay, let's move on. You know, I'm going to skip this section. This is actually in this section in the demo. This is one of the more complex setups, actually. So I'm going to skip this one. We're going to come back to it, and let's go down to the next easiest one, which is actually at the very bottom. So let's say this is my footer of the page. Let's go ahead and look at the after again, just so that we can see what that looks like. Okay. So what I wanted to do is I just wanted to have a little seam that kind of just accentuates the footer to kind of give us a nice footer here. So what I can do here, let's go ahead and go all the way to the bottom. Oh, I need to go in this one before. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a seam to the page. I'm going to close that. Now here I want to add content to the seam. So in the seam stack, I'm going to say add content to the bottom because we want content below. Okay. And then basically I'm going to move this content into the seam stack. Now I want seams to be able to control the color. So I'm going to turn off the color inside this, this column here. There we go. I'm going to turn off that. Now I'm going to go into the seam, and we're just going to set it to the orange color because that's what we were using. There we go. And then we're just going to add a seam. Now that one had a double angle on it, and that's really all we have to do, right? I'm just going to preview that. And done. Now, if you notice, when you add a seam, you'll notice that there's now a lot of white space up here because we have the height of the seam plus the padding that I had before. So probably what we're going to want to do is I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to reduce that top padding. I'm just probably going to put it like 2 or something like that. Yeah, there we go. So that's going to be something common. If you're kind of moving an existing page over, you're going to want to make sure that you kind of maybe reduce the padding because that seam adds more content or more, area to that particular content area. So you're probably going to want to reduce the padding for those. Now, other things we could do here, something interesting. Let's look at some of those other. I've seen some people love this one. It's actually one of my favorites too. If we add, where's grass? Grass. Not sure how this will look in orange, but yeah, this could look interesting. Actually, if you add this grass and you kind of make it orange, it kind of could look like fire maybe or something like that, right? So it's interesting. But one of my favorite grass themes is all the way at the end here, and I love this one. It is just really, that just looks fucking killer. Like, it's really cool. It took me a while to get this one to work inside seams, but I just love it. It looks really cool. Chances are now that I have it, like, everyone's going to be using it on every page and everyone will be tired of it, but it's really cool for now. As you see, it looks really great in not green as well. Like, I mean, this is orange. I think it looks pretty good, right? It looks really great in blue too. Here, let's just go to that blue really quick. Just kind of see. Boom. Yeah, I think it looks great in blue. Looks great in orange too, actually. So anyway, really cool stuff. This was a pretty simple one, but I just wanted to show you how you could, migrate an existing section and also do it in the footer area of a section here. Okay. So let's move up. I'm going to now work on this impact stack. And this particular one it had a couple different things, interesting things. It had a seam at the top and the bottom. It has multiple overlapping seams, which are kind of have transparency bleeding through, right? So this is an interesting one, right? It allows us to have content at the top and the bottom of an impact area. So let's have a look at that. Okay, so you're oh, I already added it. Oh, let's go ahead and wait, I'm on the wrong page. Boom. Okay. Impact, we're going to add foreground content. Oh, I already added it by accident. Okay, boom. We're going to close that one. We're going to add a new one to the page. And let's work on the top first. So I'm going to go ahead in this seams. I want to make sure that we add it to the top. And then we wanted the seam to be white because it needs to match the content area above, right? So it's going to be white. And then we're going to go ahead and add an S-curve. S-curve. Okay. And then we're going to mirror the seam because the seam needs to be on the top because it's going to be joining up with the content above the impact stack. Marcelo was asking for this template. You can already download. This is the seams demo file, and it's available right now from the doc portal. Or if you just go to the seams product page, go to the FAQ tab, and then there's a link to download the seams demo project. So anyway, let's continue. So here, this should be all we have to do for this first one. Let's just preview this really quick. So there we go. We have our nice seam. Okay, but we wanted to do that kind of that overlaid look. So we have multiple curves that kind of overlay on top of each other. So let's do that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to copy and paste this S curve. And the layering order is whatever is on the bottom is on the top of the curves. Does that make sense? So they're layered, right? So this one's going to be in the back. This one will be in the front. When we preview this page. So what I'm going to do here on this particular one, I'm going to do a custom color. So I'm going to choose the custom color for this path. And I could choose any color, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go white, and then I'm going to add an opacity. I'm going to do like 50%. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift this down a little bit. So I'm going to shift it about, 14 pixels. And actually, I'm not going to change anything else about the curve. And the reason for that is I want to show you another interesting effect with overlaying and just shifting something down. Okay, what you see is what we get is just we have that seam, but then we also kind of have like this just solid border look, right? So that could be a look that you're looking for as well. It's just kind of a line. Now I made this 14 pixels. You can make it a little bit softer, right? If we went 3 pixels. As you see, it's a little bit more difficult to see, probably even over the stream, but there's definitely a 3 pixel line there. Right, and maybe if we made something like that orange or something like that, it would really pop. Right, here, let's try that. Why not? Let's make that orange. So that's interesting. Here, let's go like 6 pixels. Let's double that. So that's kind of interesting, right? It kind of gives you an interesting effect where seems each path doesn't have a border, but you can kind of give it a mock border by overlaying 2. Seams and then shifting one down or up depending on your direction. So let's go ahead and continue what I was working on. We're going to go back and make that white 50%. And let's go back to this mode. So it's doesn't keep refreshing. Let's do 15 pixels there. And then right now what I can do is I am just going to start kind of manipulating this curve a little bit. Let's do this, modify this curve. Oops. Like that. that something a little bit different. Flop the curve. Change the starting point to be a little more dramatic. Okay, so there we go. Let's just go with that. Let's see what this looks like. Interesting. Okay, what I can do is I'm going to add one more, which could make it another interesting layer. So we're going to go ahead and add another one. And what I can do on this one is I'm going to change the color to be something like, I don't know, a light gray, a little bit darker color, but I'm still going to add an opacity. And let's change this one even a little bit more. Let's go ahead and let's move this one back. That's this one. All right, I'm just going to go with that. Okay, we could sit here and fiddle with this to make it look great forever. But as you see, this kind of gives us an interesting look, right? We kind of have some waves over here, and then the main wave kind of comes down. Could be interesting if I had another, maybe another one that mimics that. You know, let's add one more just for fun. I'm going to mimic this main one here. We're going to change the color of that. We're going to go maybe even darker, 50%. And I want to do something like that. I think that'll do it. Right. So that's interesting. There we go. Adds some interesting depth. We have 4 now overlapping paths in this seam. Kind of gives us an interesting look. Again, you can kind of, this isn't perfect. I don't like that dip there, but I don't want to spend tons of time just manipulating those curves to kind of get the look that we want, right? But as you see, this is really valuable to kind of get a really great look. What I'm going to do now is we're going to just straight up duplicate this. So I'm just going to copy this. So I'm just going to Command C, Command V. Going to copy paste this stack set. And then we're just going to manipulate a little bit, right? So now we want this one instead of the top, I need it to be on the bottom. And then we need to turn off the mirror on all of these paths because all of these are going to be on the bottom. And then all the shift that we did here, oh, that was one thing I didn't do. I didn't shift. That was probably what would have made those better. But all of these, if you added a shift, if it's on the bottom, you need to do it the negative. So I'm just going to set that to be -15. And then I'm going to set this one to be -15. And I think that's good. So all I did here is I turned off the mirror on these bottom seams. I set the position to be at the bottom instead of the top. I left pretty much everything else the same. Let's just preview that. It should look decent out of the box. So yeah, that looks decent. It looks very similar. Obviously, it looks very similar to this, just kind of flipped. So yeah, we probably want to add, here I'm going to add a little shift to this one, just for fun. There we go. So a little shift on that one. So yeah, there we go. I like that. Cool. Next up, let's go ahead and let's do this last section. Okay. So I'm going to do this section twice because first I want to show you how to do transitions with a seam on the top and the bottom. Okay. And then we're going to show you how to do floated seams. So what we're going to do is we're just going to add a seam to this section. I'm going to go ahead and add content to the top and, we just want content on the bottom. And then I'm going to also add a seam to the bottom. So what this does is when you add seam at bottom, it adds a seam below the bottom content. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to drag that content into there. We're going to go into seams. We're going to set this to be orange. And then I'm going to turn off the background color on the content because seams is going to manage that. Okay, we're going to use just a simple one for right now. We're just going to use slant. So I'm going to go ahead and add a slant up there. And then at the bottom, we're going to add another slant. Now, obviously, on this bottom one, we need to mirror that seam. so that the color matches the content area, and we're done, right? This is a way of adding a seam at the top and the bottom to kind of give you a very kind of enclosed setting. Now, if we look at this area here, what I did was I had this kind of, it was a seam at the top, and then it was a seam that went through the content. So I'm going to change this up a little bit. And what I can do is right now, I'm going to change that demo so that we get a seam that goes through the content. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the seam, and we're going to do floated content. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to move that into there. Okay. Now, when you do the floated content, seams doesn't add the background color into there. Maybe I could try to fix that. But right now, it will in preview, but in edit mode, it doesn't add the background color to the content here. It's probably something I could fix, though. Maybe I should. And then I'm going to turn off that bottom content area. Okay. And then we're also going to turn off, we can leave the bottom seam. Okay. So let's preview this. And if you notice here, when you add float, you have a seam position setting. Okay. And what that does is it's going to position the seam 70% from the top of the content. Okay. So you see right now, we now have something similar to what I wanted. Before I had it kind of going through the content, but it was on the top. Now something, if you notice, this header is here, but it's white. Okay, because before it was on the orange, but now it's on a white background. So we could change that. Now that's pretty cool, right? We have this seam going through the content, but what if I wanted it the opposite way? So that's something that we want to fix. Now, one thing I should note here is that let's just go ahead and add. I think I have some paragraphs here. I'm just going to copy this really quick. Just add some more content into this block, and we'll show you that seams will automatically grow to match the content area. So I'm going to make this a pretty large content area. Let's refresh. And as you see here, what it's doing is seams, it's still going 70% from the bottom. So what if we wanted it like up here and then all of this to be orange? So let's go ahead into the seams stack. And I'm going to change this to be, I don't know, instead of 70%, let's do like 40%. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, so as you see there, the seam starts at 40% from the top of the content area. So what it's doing is the top of the content area is somewhere around here, right? Where, if you could see my mouse, right? And it's going 40% to the bottom, starting the seam there, and then it continues that color all the way down to the bottom of the content area where I actually added another seam. Okay. So we're going to change this up a little bit, and because in my demo I had it going the opposite way, where instead of the seam being kind of going through the bottom, it went through the top. Okay, so let's go ahead and work on that, and that's going to require a little bit of extra work. So let's go ahead and okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this content back into the seams stack. And this is definitely kind of an advanced, more advanced use of seams, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding a seam into a seam. So what we're going to do is instead of this bottom seam here, okay, what I'm going to do is we're going to add another seam stack into the content of the previous seam. And we're going to set this one to have floated content. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this block grid, move it into the floated content, and then we're going to add a bottom seam, I believe. Yes. We're going to add a bottom seam. Is it? Shoot. I forget how I did it now. Haha. Gonna have to look. Sorry. No. Okay, I know what I did now. Okay. All right, this one we're going to add a top seam. I'm just going to take this existing slant here, move it up there. Oops. Whatever. Go ahead here, add a slant. Now I want this slant to be actually to be white. Okay. The reason is I need this seam to match the content below. Oops. And then this is set to float 70%. Let's do 50%. And then this slant is up here. So let's preview that. Oops, why do I have a blue block there? Did something have a blue background? Oops. I should set that there. My bad. All right, and this doesn't need a custom color. All right, let's try that now. There it goes. Okay. So there we have our slant that is above, right? And then the bottom slant actually contains this grid, this image grid that floats in the background. So it's a combination of the two things that I just showed you, where we added a seam to the top and then we did floated, but we kind of did that inside the parent seam. Again, you're probably going to want to play around with this to get your head around it. It took me a while to kind of get my head around it, even when I first designed it. So, but it is an interesting kind of more advanced use of how to kind of use a seam inside of a seam. Okay. And so someone asked if I have an impact stack that uses the S-curve. So up here, this is an impact stack. It uses the S-curve. If you want here, I'll even create a new slide. Let's just copy and paste that. And we'll add a different image so you can see it all happen. Let's preview that. So you see there, we have the impact slideshow, but the S-curve is above it. So, and it happens all behind the S-curve. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff. I really don't like that S-curve there. It's an interesting S-curve maybe for a different part of the site, but here, that's bugging me. I'm just going to go ahead and add a different S-curve. What happened? Oh, haha. Okay, so interesting thing. Here, this canvas height was set to 100. See, this is good. Live, happened right here live. So the canvas height of this is set to 100, but the seam in preview and publish is set to 200. That is a no-no. So we need to make sure that that is set to 100, and then I will get the look that I want. Boom. There we go. What is meant by floated? So what is meant by floated is inside the seam stack, you can float your content. And what that means is the content is floated on top of the seam. Okay, so if you look in the middle, the content is floated on top of the seam. So the seam goes through the middle of your content instead of like this one where it's kind of transitioning between two, right? It's kind of static on its own. So that's what I mean by floated. Cool. Okay, I'm going to jump into a couple more advanced use cases, or one more, and that is using an external seam. So I'm just going to go to a simpler page here. And not this page. Here, let's muck around with this page. Okay. So just some more use cases here. Actually, this torn paper one, if you guys haven't seen that, it's really cool. So here we have the torn paper look where it kind of looks like it was torn and ripped, right? Pretty cool stuff. And another interesting, if you layer these paper, the paper torns, you can kind of give it kind of a shadowy look, right? So kind of give it a 3-dimensional look. We did it on the Hangout on Friday. It's pretty cool. Here, why not? I'll just do it really quick. So I'm going to go ahead and on this one, I'm going to do a custom color. We're going to, let's make it black, opacity, and then we're going to shift it like 3 pixels. All right, wait, no, I need to do negative 3 pixels. Okay. And yeah, let's do that. Just kind of show you what we could do here. Maybe 3 pixels was too much. 2 pixels. So as you see there, what it does is it really gives us a kind of a 3-dimensional tear look there. That color really doesn't do it for me, but yeah, you kind of get the idea, right? Where here, let's I'm gonna do. I know the Apple color picker isn't great, but let's just do that, and then I'm going to make it a little bit darker. That's more dramatic, right? And maybe soften that up a little bit, but yeah, I think that gets the point across what you can potentially do. So yeah, that's really cool. Where again, all I did is I duplicated it, made it a little bit darker, shifted it up 2 pixels, and it kind of gives us an instant drop shadow. It's pretty cool. Okay, next up, external seams. So we haven't looked at every potential seam here. As you saw, we can layer things, right? And that's interesting because let's just take this instance here where I'm layering an angle on top of a curve. Now, if you were to visualize this, you could potentially see how that could, when those are merged together, gives us a completely different shape, right? So that gives us an angle, and then we have a curve. So by layering these paths on top of each other, if you get creative, you could do some very interesting things that are completely outside the box, right? So you see, I now invented a completely new seam shape just by combining different paths. And then I also added these. If you notice here, these aren't really full seams; they're more of shapes. So, like if we added a circle into here, and then let's change the radius a little bit, and then maybe shift it down, and change the horizontal to somewhere over here, something like that, right? And then if we preview that, what we'll see is it now kind of augments that shape, and because all these are flattened in preview mode, right? So once they're flattened, you can really create something interesting just by kind of adding these shapes or these paths on top of each other and maybe integrating some shapes to kind of give us a completely different look. Okay, so this is where you got to get your creative juices going in terms of what you can build, and you can maybe you can even adjust the color. So if we made this one, I don't know, let's make it orange. You'll see what this does. Now this one, since it's on the bottom, it's actually going to be on top, right? But if we were to adjust the layer order here, maybe put it in the middle, could give us something interesting, So here, when you start changing the colors, you can kind of see how this gives us a completely different, look. I don't think this one, it kind of looks funky having this out there in the middle of nowhere, but you can kind of see how things are now layered and then flattened once they're on the page. Okay. Now you'll notice that, so these child stacks, I kind of broke them up into various sections. This top section here gives us a lot of various paths that you can control, right? I'd say that these ones are going to be the smallest in terms of weight on the page. These are like, less than a K, very, 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 very tiny. Same thing with these S curves and Bezier curves, very, very tiny, like almost zero impact on page. And then same thing with these shapes, 0. Now these other ones down here, these are going to be kind of more static things that you have less control over, right? But I give you multiple themes. Obviously, I picked one that doesn't have another theme. Bumps doesn't have another theme. Let's look at clouds. So clouds, as you see, instead of having you give you full control over like how many clouds and the shapes of the clouds, it's very complex, right? But I give you multiple styles that you can use. Basically, I designed all of these inside Affinity Designer, and then I put them into themes for you to use. So that's that. And later on, we'll show you. Hopefully, we'll get to how to do your own SVGs as well. I'll brush on that really quickly because I know we're already hitting an hour long. I do want to add a quick note about paint. Paint splatter, it looks really cool. Okay. It does. I'm glad I added it. It looks very cool, especially ones like this. Now, while these look very cool on the page, these have a little bit more weight, the paint splatter. The reason is this isn't like a single path that's just on the page that's easy calculatable, okay? There are tons of tiny little droplets all across this which have their own individual path settings to make sure that it all scales properly across devices. So that's why inside Paint is it's definitely the worst one. And I'm talking about worse. It's like 120 kilobytes. So it is kind of like putting an image on the page. Okay. The rest, I have to say, the rest of the themes are very small and compact, less than 100K. Especially the static ones, right? But the Paint one in particular is a little bit heftier because there's a lot of data in that SVG to make sure that all these little paint splatters work as you expect them to work. So just a little, a little caveat there about Paint. I did add a note here inside the settings to kind of let you know that, hey, the Paint adds a little bit more weight. So don't use it, a million times on your page. Because it is 120, 150K, depending on the size of the splatter. But yes, be careful with the Paint. Use it sparingly. It is cool though. So at the bottom here, you'll notice that there is external super duper. Okay. And what this allows you to do, it allows you to give a path to an external SVG file. Okay. So what I can do is I'm going to bring up my FTP app really quick. I have one already on my server. I should have got it ready before this, but I didn't. And it is... I think it was this one. Seams Clouds SVG. So what I can do is I'm going to copy this URL. And I'm going to paste it into here. Perfect. Okay, so I'm linking to an external SVG file, and voila, there is my cool seam. Now, if you notice, there is a setting here called Element ID. This is very important. Because if we preview this, while we see it inside edit mode, it does not work. Okay? Because we need to have something else. We need to have an element ID for this. So if we look at this SVG file, I'm going to go ahead and edit this or open it with Visual Studio. Okay. You'll notice that inside here, let me make the text here a little bit larger. You'll notice that inside, now if you notice, SVGs are just text. Okay, it's kind of like an HTML document, a little bit different. But you'll notice that there is an ID of seam. Okay, so this ID of seam, that's what we want. We want this element ID. So I'm going to take this ID of seam, and we're going to paste or type that into there. So I'm going to put my element ID is seam, and then we're going to preview that. Oops, what happened? Did I break something? Oh, I know why. Cross Safari, we need to disable cross origins. Okay, so if it's not working, there we go. If it is not working, what you need to do is if you preview in the browser, go to Develop, disable cross origin restrictions. And the reason that it wasn't showing is because it's not from localhost. It's coming from my web server, which is a different URL. And browser security is great, but sometimes it's annoying to us. And that is one of the annoyances now, where if you're using warehoused images, you probably noticed that. So anyway, so you have to disable cross-origin restrictions inside your develop menu in Safari, and then you'll be able to preview these external SVGs. It'll work. You won't have any issues once it's on the website, but you'll want to make sure that you fix that. And then this seam, yeah. So hopefully that, now for this particular seam, I'm going to make it a little bit larger because it's a pretty big cloud. I'm going to make it 200 pixels. If I preview that. Oh, it won't work. You have to preview in the browser. Oops. I thought I did that. What the heck? Oh, okay. Here's another interesting thing. So I set this to be a canvas height of 200. And same thing here. It's canvas height of 200. But inside my SVG, it is set to be 100. Let's go ahead and modify that. It's set to be 140. So I'm just going to set that to be 200 just for fun. And I will show you kind of this inside Affinity Designer as well. Let's go ahead and do that. Now we might hit some browser cache issues, but lovely browser cache. All right, fine. I'm gonna cop out, and I'm just gonna set this to be 140 because Safari wants to cache it that way. And there we go. Okay. Okay, so really quick, two more things we're going to do. I'm going to open up Affinity Designer. I'm going to show you some tips about creating your own SVGs. This is obviously, you're kind of on your own, but for those that know Affinity Designer, and there's other apps. If you love Illustrator, you can use that. If you love Sketch, you can use that. There's so many ways to create SVGs now. I've kind of I've been trying to myself learn and use Affinity Designer more, so that I can use it on my iPad if need be. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up. There's none of them in my recents. I must did that work on my laptop. Let's just do file open. Open up behind. Okay. I'm going to open up one of these. I'm going to do the paper one. Okay. Open up paper. So here is this is the actual file that I did to create here's the torn paper SVGs that I created. All these are exactly what's inside seams. Okay. Now in Affinity Designer, what's nice about those, and I believe Illustrator does this as well, and maybe Sketch if you're using Sketch, is if you give it a name. So if I did like curve 1 here, okay, if I give this layer a name, that name is going to be the ID when I export this as an SVG. Okay, so when I export this particular thing, so if I go here, let's do file, export. I'm going to export to SVG. I want the selection without background. And then I'm going to export that. And let's just do it to my desktop. It's fine. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm hiding my desktop icons. So I'm just going to go to desktop. And we're going to open that inside Visual Studio Code. Oh, and it did a nice inline document here. ID equals. Oh, what? I know that it does it. Maybe you have to create a group. Sorry. If you create a group and do my seam, let's try that. File. Oh, maybe it only does it when you export the whole document. Here, let's try that. I'm gonna export the whole document. Export. Save, replace. It's in there. How come it's not showing me? Can I pretty the XML? Nope, it doesn't let me do that. Okay. In here is the ID somewhere. It found it, but okay, for some reason it's in there. I don't want to find it, but that was the trick. So you're probably not gonna. Now, one thing I should note, actually, that's actually kind of cool. So even though I exported all these as a single SVG, you can import this single SVG and then reference the ID in there, and it will only import that one layer. Does that make sense? So that's actually pretty powerful. So you can export this entire paper seam. All right, here, let's try that. Man, I'm going to go completely off the cuff, and I'm going to do, all right, let's open up Transmit. I haven't even tested this, but in theory, it should work. So let's go ahead and do it. So I'm going to go ahead and upload that to my server. Seams paper. I'm going to copy URL. We're going to go back into RapidWeaver. Go into here. I'm going to paste that. And the ID was my seam. Okay. Now you're going to see the entire SVG in edit mode, but when I preview this, it should only import the one seam. Okay. What did I name that curve? Curve 1. Let's try curve 1. See here, I'm trying to do something. Oh, it's the browser thing again. Haha. I'm going to put my seam back. My seam. Okay. Well, I plan on doing a video on this. I will perfect this for when I do a video and show you guys how to do that. So I'm going to be creating an advanced video on how to do this. And I'll make sure that I perfect this process so that you guys know how to do it. But it's cool. It is possible. I showed you with the clouds. I'd never tried it with this exporting multiple things in a path and doing that. I should note that one of the benefits of doing the external SVGs is that the SVG file itself is cached by the browser. So if you're using the same exact seam a lot, basically what you could do is you can externalize it and then basically the browser will cache it so that whenever it loads, it already has that seam SVG file cached in the browser. So you'll get a little bit of performance hit. I mean, most SVGs are going to be pretty tiny, but hey, we'll take any performance hit we can get. So caching for the win. Sometimes it drives us nuts though, right guys? And gals. Okay. Last up, I want to show you, well, I'll leave this. No, I'll close this. I'm going to show you the animations that I've been working on. So first off, I'm going to go ahead and open up the animations that Matthias made, because people are raving about it in the, oh, wow, check you out. Look at you. Very interesting. Okay. Is something like this possible? Actually, you know what? Something like this might be possible. I'll show you what I've done so far. I hadn't thought about doing this continuous kind of up and down motion. I'm assuming Matthias, hopefully, I don't know if you're still here. I'm assuming you did this with sections box. But you should be able to do this. I should be able to potentially make this possible. I had never thought about this waving up and down. It's definitely an edge case. It's not something you want all over the place because it is very in your face. But it should be possible. It should be possible. Pretty interesting. Okay, let's look at the use case that I've already made, though. So let's go ahead and do that. And let me just clean up some of these windows here. Just go, don't need this, don't need this, don't need this. Okay, we're going to go to sandbox.joeworkman.net. And hopefully you probably always, if you right now, if you want to go to sandbox.joeworkman.net, here I'll paste that link into the chat room. For those who are viewing later, I don't know how long this will be up, but you can see it. So on page load, you'll notice that those kind of animated up, and it kind of gave us a bouncing effect. I don't have repeat animations right now. It's just purely just a one-time kind of bounce. And if we scroll down the page, you'll notice that those, I probably could have added a delay, but there you go. As I scroll down, here, let's refresh again. If I scroll down, you'll notice that those kind of animate. They kind of grow into the position. Right. So that's the current animation I'm going to ship in version 1.2. And I'll see about some sort of maybe potentially adding some continuous. Because essentially what the animation that you had, Matthias, there was just basically my animation that I had here. It's just continuous. Right. And so instead of just loading it once, I can allow you to just infinitely bounce that if you wanted. I definitely don't recommend for everything, but I could see that being really cool and make things stand out. So yes, repeat. So if you see that, I mean, that does exactly what you wanted, right? It does the exact bounce. And then obviously if I had layers, we could make everything bounce, and you can actually add animations on a per layer basis, right? So here I'm going to open up this project file and kind of show you guys how it's currently architected. It might change by the time I release it. But I'll show you how it's kind of currently built. So this is the page that we were looking at right now. So here we have a seams. Here is an S-curve, and I gave it an Animate ID of animate. Okay. Now, this Animate ID, it's important because it needs to be unique for each path that you want to animate. So I'm using animate. I can't use animate again. And then basically what I can do is now there's a new child stack called animation morph. Morph is currently the only animation. I don't know if I'm going to be adding more. But inside the morph animation, you give it the animate ID, and then you give it the duration of the animation, and then a delay so you can delay it. And then there's all kinds of stuff for the timing curves. So all kinds of animations that you could do here. You're going to have to just play with this. Inside the, I believe in the tooltip, maybe here. In here. Come on, tooltip. Whenever you want a tooltip to come up, it doesn't come up. There it goes. Okay, so here I give you a URL inside the tooltip that you can go ahead and look. These animations use GreenSock. So if we go to greensock.com/docs/easing, you can kind of see what all of those are. Now, GreenSock is a very professional easing thing. It is not cheap. It costs me a lot of money to be able to ship with this software, but it gives us the best animation library on the internet. Here you can play with all the various elastic things, so you can kind of see kind of what that animation gives you. Just kind of look at this ball. As you see, that's bounce. Here's kind of a rough. I don't think that would really look good on a seam. but kind of slow-mo where it goes fast, slow, and then fast, right? So you can kind of see these animations. Obviously, Power 0 is very linear. Power 1 it's a more curved, right? So it's faster, and then slow at the end. It kind of drops off. So you can use this to help you visualize how the animation is going to be. And kind of give you some. Actually, this back one is interesting. Here, I'm going to choose that. Let's go back. I'm going to choose back. I'm going to preview that. Let's see what that looks like. That's pretty cool, right? If you noticed, it goes up and then it dips back down. So yeah, interesting. You have a lot of power with these animations, with these effects. You can do a lot with them, and yeah, and just to show you, I animated at the bottom. So down here on this seam, I gave it a different Animate ID, and then there's another Morph where I can actually give this one a completely different effect if I wanted to, and that's that. Let's see, maybe some kind of timing or built-in randomness to make continuous waves behave random would be icing on the cake. Yeah, we'll see what we could do. But yeah, we could definitely do some continuous stuff. Again, what you could definitely do is this animation here. You can, if I I can definitely add the continuous, right? So there's looping animation, but then you can have a different animation for every single curve, right? So I could have another S curve here, and then this one would obviously have a different path because I'd change the S curve, and then you would have another animation stack that is assigned to this one, and then you can have different timing, different, maybe even a different effect. So different layers can be doing different things to give you that random look. But in terms of making this effect random, maybe we'll see. But definitely, I think maybe looping turned off by default, obviously, would definitely be an interesting thing. Sweet. So thanks, guys. That kind of wraps it up for, I think, my very first kind of live action live that I've done. So did you guys like this? Just maybe some thumbs up in the chat box if you guys thought this was fun. You guys liked it. Maybe do some more of this. I think doing more live stuff, maybe like a Weaver Wednesday thing, could be fun. And maybe I would like to actually extend maybe some offers to maybe get some people on to do some live coaching, things of that nature. I thought that would be an interesting thing. So I've been thinking about making that a perk for people that joined the conference last year. So if you attended the conference and you think having like a live coaching session with me would be interesting, I would love to hear from you. Yeah, maybe we can start doing that. So maybe next week we could have a live coaching session where I help you for an hour, and you get to leverage my brain and pick my brain for an hour, and hopefully everyone else can benefit from that too. So yeah, if you guys like Seams, go out and check it out on Weaverspace, weavers.space/RapidWeaver/stack/Seams. And thank you very much, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this live stream, and we'll talk to you soon on Weaverspace.